Welcome to episode 157 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. But more important, our sixth annual Civil War Halloween Spooktacular. Once again, I'm joined in eternal peaceful repose by Scary Mary Fincher, as well as our special guest from the other side, Jen Vincent Price. I am merely an egged house named Darren. Be afraid, ghouls, be afraid. How we doing? Happy Halloween.
An egged house.
Happy Halloween.
Happy
I know,
Halloween.
I'm cracking up at the egged house.
Next year
Was
you'll
not
be
expecting that one.
What are you going to be next year? A toilet papered tree
I have like 365 days to worry about it. Don't you worry about it.
or a forgotten AC unit? I had to get that in. I had to.
Oh, well done. Well done. Well, speaking of things forgotten, Mary, I did not forget to ask you what you're drinking tonight.
I am drinking red wine. Well, actually, it doesn't need to be Halloween for me to drink red wine.
I didn't realize we would deal with royalty tonight.
Yeah. And I do have my skeleton bug with me as well.
Okay.
Or skull, or whatever. All skull. Right. I don't know.
Jay Price, what about yourself?
I am drinking a Goose Island 312 in my Antietam tumbler. And I also have a Taco Bell cup with body armor in it because I'm still trying to replenish fluids from Sunday.
Yeah.
So
congratulations. All right.
Yeah. And what are you drinking, Darren?
Thank you, Mary. Thank you so much for asking. I appreciate it. I am drinking Yingling because why not? And I'm drinking it out of my orange skeleton mug as well, which kind of looks like you a little bit as I hold it up right there. And that's what I'm drinking. So off we go. And it's crazy, but this is already our sixth annual Civil War Halloween episode. And as we say every year, you don't have to believe in ghosts or goblins, the New York Jets, or any other eternally cursed things, to appreciate a good, fun ghost, although the Bears, to appreciate a really good, fun ghost story around Halloween. We do this every year. And as we do every year, we bring in our paranormal investigator friend and recent winner of the Chicago Marathon, Mary, according to her.
Runner.
Jen Price, to tell us some spooky stories yet again. How we doing, Jen? What's new?
Good. Just to clarify, runner of the marathon, not winner, but runner. Yeah. It's my fault because I skipped the Malort shots that they had at like my old 10 or 12 somewhere in there. I was like, yeah, I'm not doing it. Because my stomach, no.
I don't blame you.
Anyway, well, that's good. It's good that you did it. So why don't we get started here? And I think, what we do in this every time is we each tell a couple of ghost stories, some fun stories around this Halloween season. And Jen, since you are our guest, why don't you open this coffin and get us started?
Okay. This summer I went to Chancellorsville and Fredericksburg, that whole area. So my first stories are from Fredericksburg, and my second set is from Chancellorsville.
Cool.
So I'm going to start with Fredericksburg. It says the day they say the sunken road at Fredericksburg never truly grew quiet after December 1862. When the battle came, the Confederates lined the old stone wall and waited as Union soldiers marched straight into the storm. Volley after volley tore through the blue ranks until the earth itself seemed to drink the blood of the fallen. By nightfall, the lane was choked with bodies, and the cries of the wounded echoed against the frozen ground. For days, no one dared to move among the dead. The winter wind carried the stench of powder and decay, and even the crows kept their distance. Locals later whispered that the road was cursed, that on cold nights a mist rises from the fields, and you can hear the tramp of ghostly boots, the click of phantom rifles being loaded, and the low murmur of men still waiting for orders that never came. Some claim to have seen pale figures along the wall, faces half hidden in the smoke, reliving the moment when life and death were only a heartbeat apart. So I have two stories from Fredericksburg. The first one comes from a visitor who walked the sunken road one evening just before the battlefield was closing. The park was nearly empty and the last light was fading behind Marie's Heights. They said it was quiet, that heavy, still kind of quiet that settles in just before nightfall. No traffic, no voices, just the sound of their footsteps on gravel. And then they heard it. A single shout, faint but sharp, like a command barked from somewhere up the hill, followed by what sounded like dozens of boots moving in rhythm. But when they looked around, no one was there. The path was empty. The air was cold enough to see your breath. The sound grew closer. and louder. Marching boots, crunching and steady, until it seemed the unseen column was passing right by them. They froze, heart pounding. They even felt the vibration of it through the ground. And then again, silence. Nothing but the wind. Later, when they told the ranger about it, he just nodded and said they weren't the first to hear the soldiers march, and probably not the last.
Oh,
And then
creepy.
my second, isn't that creepy?
Yeah.
And then my second account from Fredericksburg kind of comes from the same area. It seems like apparently what I'm getting from my research is that the Sunken Road is a good place to go look for haunted things at
Mhm.
Fredericksburg.
Hmm.
And my next account comes from a pair of visitors who stopped by the battlefield late one summer evening. They just finished a walking tour and decided to linger to see the sunken road under the stars. They said it was beautiful at first, the stone wall glowing faintly in the moonlight, the area quiet and still. Then they noticed a light, a pale flickering orb about the size of a lantern, hovering a few feet off the ground. At first, they thought it was a park light or maybe someone with a flashlight, but there were no trails, no people, and no sound. The light drifted slowly along the line of the old stone wall, steady, deliberate, as if following the path where the soldiers once stood. They watched in silence as a second light appeared beside it, and then a third. The orbs moved together side by side like men advancing shoulder to shoulder across the field. And then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they winked out. Gone. No sound, no trace, just the darkness returning heavier than before. When they asked a ranger about it the next morning, he told them others had seen those lights too, always along the same stretch of sunken road, always moving in the same direction. Some say they're spirits of soldiers still searching for their way home. Others think it's the battlefield itself replaying its history, a kind of light trapped in time. Either way, something still walks the sunken road, and sometimes it shines.
Creepy.
Well, I
Oh,
mean, the Fred, that's a creepy place. And
yeah.
anybody who's
It's
been to the Innis house up there, and
Yes.
you see the bullet holes. I mean, you can see the creepiness of it. And you go to Fredericksburg and you walk that Marie's Heights, you walk the Sunken Road. It definitely has a creepy feel. We go down there once a year or so, and we go to this one bar down there, which is right about halfway up the hill. And every time we go there, they talk about it. There's always someone talking about something creepy going on in that site because that would have been the house. That building would have been right on the path of the men coming up the hill. And we were
Hmm.
there one time a couple of years ago, and the woman's like, "I don't want to be here at night. I hate being here at night." So it's a lot of creepy things about that. There's no question. So yeah, it's definitely a creepy story.
yeah, those are really creepy. And I have one that's your orb story. I have one of mine is similar to that as
Yeah.
well. So I think it's a common occurrence at battlefields to see something like that. And yeah, that's
Yeah.
just creepy. Oh.
Yeah. Honestly, there was a local legend by my hometown, like where I went to college, of a
Mhm.
ghost light. And I had seen the ghost light before I went to my first day of classes.
Whoa.
So that's how you know you're a ghost nerd. You see the local ghost light and then you go to class.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Mary School didn't have a ghost light; they had a Labatt's light, but she saw that quite often.
The flashing
Anyway,
Labatt's light.
yeah, pretty was.
Yeah.
Anyway, so speaking of scary, what's your
Yeah.
story, Mary?
Okay, so mine is I'm gonna divert away from like the usual ghost story, and I'm actually gonna talk about some instances of EVP, also known as electronic voice phenomena. So when I was researching this, I was using one of Mark Nesbitt's books. He's a local guy here in Gettysburg, used to be a park ranger. He now does ghost tours, which they're really good. They have a lot of history in them, but they're spooky as well. So anyway, this book is called Civil War Ghost Trails, and he has a section in it just a little bit about EVP. And I kind of went down a rabbit hole with it, like you do, like we all us Civil War nerds do. We go down rabbit holes. Um, and so EVP is electronic voice phenomena. And now again, like anytime we do these episodes, and Darren said this to begin with, we understand that everyone's not a believer, and you might not believe EVP is, like a ghost thing or whatever. But again, this is meant to be fun, and this is just another aspect of ghost hunting, and paranormal investigation that, I find to be quite fascinating. But anyone familiar with ghost hunting shows, or that is interested in the paranormal will know what EVP is. Especially, I mean, I'm sure all of us have heard stories involving it with the Civil War. For instance, the show Expedition X, which Darren and I are huge fans of, features it quite a bit, which by the way, they have an episode about Gettysburg coming out in the new year, which is awesome. The two Phil and I think her name, it's not Jessica, it's Heather, I think.
No, Jess has got to come back.
I
Anyway,
know, I know, I
I
know. But
digress.
anyway, Phil Phil was here with I think it's Heather filming a few months ago. So EVP was discovered when magnetic tape was invented. So think like cassette tapes, VHS. I'm sure there's people listening to this that have no idea what that stuff is, but I mean, I'm sure the three of us used to make mixtapes when we were younger.
Yep.
I used to record them right off the record songs right off the radio and make a mixtape. Um, so there are some sources that say that there may also have been EVP captured on older wire recording devices as well. But EVP is voices recorded on tape when no one is speaking, so when there's complete silence. And the first instance happened in 1959 when Frederick Jurgensen was recording bird calls alone in a field when he discovered that he also recorded voices. And one of those voices was his mother calling him by the pet name she had for him as a kid. And in 1964, he wrote a book about it called Voices from Space. And today, investigators rely on digital recorders set on voice activation, so they won't record anything unless someone is talking. And the way it is done during a paranormal investigation is, a question is asked, and there's a pause, silence, you wait, and then you ask the next question. And the player will start recording if no discernible sound is present. And when played back, the results can be quite clear, but they can also be very, very muddled as well. And it's sometimes hard to hear what they're saying. Something similar to this is also called a ghost or spirit box. Again, if you watched Expedition X, you'll know what this is. That's like the radio. It sounds like the radio. And they say like when you hear voices on the radio, it's the spirit world communicating with you. And it scans AM, FM radio frequencies to get those voices. So there's many instances of EVP being captured on battlefields and in the towns and various places near where the battles happened. So I just wanted to talk about some of the cool and interesting stories that I found in my research, and some of them are creepy. And these are mainly stories that I found in Mark Nesbitt's book because he's done a lot of EVP. So the first EVP stories I have are from Chattanooga, and I also have another story associated with Chattanooga as my second ghost story. So one of the stories for the EVP is from Missionary Ridge. And just quick refresher, Missionary Ridge was part of the battles for Chattanooga and was fought on November 25th, 1863. On the Union side, you have General Sherman and General Thomas, and on the Confederate side, you have General Patrick Cleburne. So during this one particular EVP session that Mark Nesbitt did, a question was asked if it was difficult climbing the ridge. And there were some answers that didn't make any sense. But then there was also a clink of metal, so perhaps like a rifle being loaded. And this is another thing I found in my research is that hearing the clinking of metal, like just that, the rifle being loaded is something common that happens in these EVP recordings that are taken on battlefields. And then there's an answer of yes, birds chirping, someone saying, all right, and then the words forward. So almost as if they're going into battle. So, and I was getting I was creeped out. I was researching this while I was by myself at night, and I was getting really creeped out. EVP's also been done at the Battle of Franklin, Tennessee, where the Battle of Franklin was fought on November 30th, 1864. We've done an episode about it. We've also talked about, I think I talked about the ghost of Patrick Cleburne a couple years ago on our Spooktacular.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, where he's known as the general, and he was like actually talking to somebody that was visiting the field, and then he like just rides away on his horse.
Yeah.
So he on Mr. Dead, as we called him, the horse.
Yes, I remember
Dead.
General Mr. Dead.
Mr. Dead. So Claiborne haunts various areas around the battlefield, including the Carton Plantation, where his body was laid out on the veranda after he had been killed. So there was some EVP collected from near the site where Claiborne was thought to have been killed, and the question was asked, General Claiborne, are you still here? To which the answer was a quiet yes. Another question asked, yeah, that I was like just imagining that how quiet it would have been. It's like,
yeah, I got chills on that one. But anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no worries at all. And then another question was asked, General Claiborne, do you regret fighting for the Confederacy? And there was a 2 or 3 syllable answer that sounded like blank ever. And Mark Nesbitt speculates that it might have been him saying never, which I found interesting. I was like, oh, okay. And then in another recording, The person said, God bless you and your men, General Claiborne. And the answer is a woman or child's voice saying, let's do this for him. Which, like, I was like, creepy. Um, so another place that there's been EVP is Andersonville, which Darren and I visited in 2023, and it's like it's a must visit for anybody who studies the Civil War. It is a very humbling place. It will likely change you when you visit it. It's also creepy, but it's just very like you go there and it's just like I said, it's humbling. It's very sobering to be there. And Andersonville was only open for 14 months, and 13,000 men died there during that time. And again, there's been EVP captured there. And the question was asked, what do you think of this place, Andersonville? And the answer was life breeds in hell.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was like, whoa. And then,
Accurate, but wow.
yeah, like power, like just the other question was asked to a specific soldier. Um, George from New York, were you captured at Gettysburg? And the answer was hell no, and then died Milwaukee.
Oh.
So obviously
Sounds like the Cubs.
yeah, died Milwaukee.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, continue.
No, that was good.
Tough, but as a Cubs fan, I have to say tough but fair.
Died Milwaukee. The ghost is predicting the future. And at Manassas, there have been EVP recordings. Question was asked, men of the 63rd, can you talk to me? And then things went silent and a quiet voice said, he can hear us.
Oh.
Like,
That's cool.
and then not surprisingly, there has been EVP captured at Gettysburg, but because we talk about it, it gets talked about a lot. So I didn't want to talk about it too much. But there is a particular instance where at the Farnsworth House, there has been a voice captured of a woman angrily saying during a ghost tour, how dare you? And apparently, this woman was Darren, wasn't she the one that supposedly lived in the house and she didn't like the Confederate sharpshooters?
That's the story. Who knows? But again, that's the story.
So she gets angry when people, and she's like, I guess it would be like a residual haunting. She didn't like the Confederates going up
Yeah,
into
it'd be
her
more probably an
attic.
intelligent haunting if it's responding to a
Oh yeah, I
person.
guess yeah, intelligent. Yeah, how
Yeah.
dare you? Which is
Yeah.
creepy. Um, but I wanted to talk about EVP because it's something that really, really interests me when it comes to the paranormal. And I just found these stories, and there's many, many others out there about EVP being captured at battlefields, and whether or not you believe in it, it's still an interesting side of the history, and to hear some of the answers that come back. To
Hmm.
hear like at Franklin, and you ask if Patrick Claiborne's there, and there's this very quiet yes.
That's scary. That'd be a tough thing right there, I
That
imagine.
but I mean, it makes sense given the ghost stories about him, and that the one thing that is talked about um is that you can hear him walking upstairs, like just these heavy
Hmm.
footsteps. And apparently there was another story I read about him where he's standing on the porch with his head down and his hands are like kind of over the porch, and it looks like he's thinking about something. But they just call him the general, and he's in a big gray coat, tall guy. um but yeah, it's just the EVP stuff is really, I find it very, very fascinating part of paranormal investigation. So that's my
Yeah, me
first
too.
story. Really
Okay, well, that's
interesting.
cool. Okay. Well, my first story takes us to the small village of Sharpsburg, Maryland, Mary. We're on September 17th of 1862. It saw an unprecedented display of death and destruction, what will become the bloodiest single day in American history. Of course, this is the Battle of Antietam. Now, history about the battle: over a 12-hour period, there were 23,110 casualties that occurred, which breaks down to 32 casualties per minute when you spread it over the 12 hours they fought. It was fought in cornfields, woodlots, bridges throughout Sharpsburg, Maryland. Entire units were wiped out. First Texas lost an astounding 82% of their men. The 12th Mass lost 67% of their men. But when it was over, neither Union General George McClellan nor Robert E. Lee could claim a decisive victory. Dead and dying soldiers littered the battlefield, and some bodies were placed in burial trenches, but in many cases were buried where they fell and whose graves had been lost to time. And with all that violent death in such a short amount of time, it's been said that many of those souls who lost their lives on that day have never left and remain on the Antietam battlefield. Now, Stories can be found throughout the battlefield, from the famous Sunken Road, where also known as Bloody Lane, where a group of schoolboys were visiting and they stood near the Irish Brigade monument, and they reported hearing the sound of distant chanting, which they thought was Christmas music. Then they realized they weren't singing fa la la, they were singing fa a bala. And then they suddenly stopped, and the noise stopped. Was this the sound of the Irish Brigade years later? Who knows? Or the Rohrbach Bridge, which is known today as the Burnside Bridge, where strange lights have been seen at night, and the subtle smell of gunpowder um, has been all over the battlefield. Where Ambrose writes, Ninth Corps fought to the death at the bridge was Robert Toombs' 500 Georgians. The Dunker Church, the meeting house that was built in 1852 by the pacifist German Baptist Brethren, was the epicenter to suffering and death, which later became a field hospital. That former bullet-ridden white building, now rebuilt to resemble the original form, has been the site of strange lights and an overwhelming feeling of negative energy to who visit it. But the story I want to talk about is the Pry House. The Pry House was built in 1844 by brothers Philip and Samuel Pry, who inherited the land from their father's farm on the east bank of Antietam Creek. The Pry House was taken over in September of 1862 by the Union Army as a staging area for the upcoming battle. When the battle began on the morning of September 17th, Philip remained in his house while his wife and his children, they took the Army ambulance to the town of Keedysville. The Pry House became the headquarters of Union Commander George McClellan, who moved the family's best furniture to the front yard so they could sit and watch the battle. The Pry House
That's
was
a McClellan thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Could you imagine? Just let's take this stuff outside.
Someone get the ornament, you know. But the Pry House was also the headquarters of Dr. Jonathan Letterman, the medical director of the Army of the Potomac, who remained in the house throughout the battle, and from there dispatched Army ambulances to transport the wounded around the battlefield. So, like every property in Sharpsburg, the Pry House was used as a field hospital, using the property's barn as a hospital for 1,500 enlisted men. And the house itself would house two Union officers. The first was General Joseph Hooker, who was hit in the foot. The other was General Israel Richardson, who suffered a much more serious injury when he had some shell fragments enter his side. Richardson was placed in the second floor bedroom. This is the bedroom of the owners, Philip and his wife, Elizabeth Pry. President Lincoln visited him on this battlefield when they came as well. Richardson's wife, Fanny Traver, heard of her husband's injury. She traveled to Sharpsburg but with her sister to tend to her husband. Now, General McClellan spent the next 6 or so weeks in that second floor bedroom, but on November 3rd of 1862, Richardson would succumb to his wound and die in the bed of the Pry House. He'll be one of 6 total generals on both sides who lost their lives due to the Battle of Antietam. Now, years after the battle, strange sightings began to be reported at the Pry House, which is now part of the Antietam National Battlefield. In 1976, an electric fire broke out and burnt much of the Pry House, and most of the building's interior was heavily damaged. When the building was on fire, firemen, as they tend to do, they came to put out the fire. A fireman happened to look out at the second floor window and noticed a woman wearing Victorian era clothes staring out at him from it. Now, of course, he's thinking someone was trapped inside the house, so he raced inside. And when he got to that second floor bedroom where he saw the woman, he noticed the second floor had already collapsed. So it was impossible for anybody to be in that window. So the fireman confirmed, there was nobody inside the house at all, but it left him shaken and confused. The next year, 1977, the National Park Service rebuilt the Pry House, but that didn't stop the strange happenings from occurring on the property. When a worker arrived during its rebuild, he claimed he also saw that woman in the Civil War era clothes, standing in that same second floor window that the fireman saw her in. So similar, he was curious, so he went inside to see who was inside the house. And again, he was startled to see that the second floor had not been rebuilt yet. So it was impossible for a woman to be floating in that spot looking out the window. Later, when the Pry House did finally reopen to visitors, a visitor to the house saw that woman in the Civil War clothes walking down the stairs. And when she asked the staff about this reenactor, she was told that no reenactors were in the house that day and no one else saw this woman. So she was kind of shook as well. Many believe the woman that has been seen at the Pry House is the spirit of Israel Richards' wife, Fanny Traver, who still stands in that second floor of the home, tending to her dying husband and still walking the hallways of the Pry House as if bound to the site of her husband's death. Today, a visit to the Pry House still gives its visitors a feeling of sadness and a loss of the and a loss on the site of incalculable death and suffering. So, according to Joshua Chamberlain, that quote, on great fields something stays, bodies disappear, but spirits linger. He may not have been talking about Antietam directly, but thanks to that day in September of 1862, it certainly does rank up there with the greatest of them all, and the spirits may remain there to tell their stories around the Antietam battlefield.
Wow. That's a
Wow.
cool story.
Yeah,
It is a cool story.
Yeah.
It's an obviously Antietam is near and dear to my heart, but there's a lot of very interesting stories. If you believe that spirits are created by violent or sudden death, unexpected death, I can't think of anywhere more than Antietam.
Yeah. And I'm sure
Yeah.
McCullen haunts it while sitting on the ottoman outside.
Probably with his feet up,
Yeah.
probably.
That's
probably why he didn't go to heavy. He just doesn't want. He's no rush to get there. He's just sitting there,
sitting on the ottoman with his sunglasses on.
probably with his glasses. Yeah. Anyway, so
Yeah.
what's next for you, Jen?
Next, we are going to Chancellorsville. But real quick, I have a quick funny story that Antietam historians and anyone else who's listening to this will appreciate, given the story Darren just told. I have a friend that lives in Sharpsburg, and one of the local stories is that Mrs. Pry and Mrs. Richardson did not get along very well. And after her husband's death, Mrs. Richardson told people that her husband died more as a result of Mrs. Pry's cooking.
Oh, that's a
So,
burn.
yeah, yeah. I don't know if I assume he died from his battle wounds, but that story always kind of makes me laugh.
I know the
Oh.
feeling. In this house, we pray afterwards, but that's a different story. So,
Oh my gosh.
so
But anyway,
That's a good one.
back to on to Chancellorsville. And this was a go like I've looked for years for for a ghost story about one of the people I'm going to talk about, and this was the first time I ever found even a hint of something. So, May 1863. Deep in the tangled woods of Virginia, the Battle of Chancellorsville raged for days. Smoke drifting through the thickets, musket fire echoing through the pines. General Robert E. Lee called it his greatest victory, but for one of his commanders, it was the beginning of a haunting. That commander was Thomas Stonewall Jackson, one of the South's most famous generals. During a nighttime reconnaissance, Jackson was accidentally shot by his own men. His arm was amputated in a field hospital nearby, and he was taken to a plantation to recover. But the wound turned to infection, and a few days later, Stonewall Jackson was dead. He was 39 years old. His body went one way, and his arm, they say, went another, buried in a separate grave somewhere in the woods near Chancellorsville. Now it's on Elwood Plantation, and it's got its own grave marker. For more than a century, locals and visitors alike have claimed the general never truly left this battlefield. They've seen him, or something like him, walking the edge of the old plank road where he fell, and around the ruins of the Chancellor House, where the flames once lit up the night sky. And the stories that come from this place make you wonder whether the war ever really ended here at all. One of the most persistent tales comes from the area near the clearing where Jackson was shot. Visitors report hearing the clap of unseen hooves, the jingle of harnesses, and men's voices calling out in urgent tones, a phantom patrol that never returns. Some have even described seeing a lone rider emerge from the trees at dusk, a man in a gray uniform with one arm tucked close to his side. The horse is said to pause, look toward the road, and then vanish into the mist. Rangers say these sightings often happen on calm nights in early May, the anniversary of the battle. Sometimes they say the air smells faintly of campfire smoke even when there's no one around for miles. And then there's the ground around the Chancellor House itself, or what's left of it. The original mansion burned during the fighting, leaving only scorched earth and a few bricks. You can kind of see a little bit of the
Mhm.
foundation, like
Yeah.
the outline today.
Yep.
Mhm.
But that spot still draws strange reports. People who visit after dark have described hearing footsteps crunching through the brush, the sound of heavy doors slamming shut, and even faint piano music drifting through the trees. One paranormal team recorded what sounded like a man's voice, low and commanding, saying, "Prepare to fire." But I could not find I couldn't find any of that
Mhm.
EVP online today. I was looking. But when they played it back later, they realized no one in the group had spoken at that moment. So
Wow.
that's another, like what goes with what Mary was talking about, EVP. There's one for Chancellorsville.
That's awesome.
Others say others say they've seen flickering lights inside the ruins of the house, like the glow of lanterns moving around. And maybe it's the echo of that final night when the Chancellor family fled their burning home and the wounded filled the cellars, waiting for help that never came. And for those who walk these fields today, it's impossible to forget these events. On quiet nights, some say the soldiers, the generals, and the lost, they still march and still watch and still wait.
Hmm. Wow.
It's
That's
funny. I
really
mean, that
creepy.
I was at Elwood one time, and this is God a few years ago now. I was talking to one of the whoever was I don't know what you call it, docent or whoever was working there at the time, and
Uh-huh.
he showed me some stuff. It was in the morning. It was kind of rainy. There was nobody there. It was with a friend of ours, and he started telling me this story where he was talking about the two generals, one who was mortally wounded at Chancellorsville, Stonewall. I know it's
Hmm.
debated to get pneumonia, the whole thing. But or then there was the other one at the Battle of the Wilderness who they thought was going to go up the spout but survived. That was James Longstreet, and he says
Okay.
which is right around the corner from Elwood. And
Yeah.
he says that one time that he was telling somebody about the two generals, about Jackson was killed, died at Guinea Station, and then Longstreet was shot but survived by his own men too. And as he was telling the story, he looked out in the woods, and two horses came out of the woods. One had a saddle and one didn't. And they both walked in and stood there for a second and then turned and ran back into the woods.
Huh.
Whoa.
And so obviously the saddle is the horse, the ride with the saddle with no rider is supposed to signify death. And the other
Yeah.
one didn't have it. So he thought that maybe the one with the horse without the saddle was Longstreet because he survived. One with the saddle was Jackson because he died.
That
He
could
says
be.
he's never seen the horses before that. It says he has never seen him probably since. Who knows? But
That's
that's the story that pops in my head about Elwood. It's a strange place, and it's a place that's really very very great to visit if you're in the area. Go to Elwood.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's creepy.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
that's really
So there you
creepy.
go. So speaking of creepy, Mary, what do you got?
All right, so I'm taking us back to the Western Theater for this one to Chattanooga. So as I mentioned earlier, when I talked about the EVP, I did mention the Battle of Missionary Ridge, which is part of the battles for Chattanooga, fought in November of 1863. The battles for Chattanooga also include two other battles. One is the Battle of Lookout Mountain, and the other is the Battle of Wrinkled Gap. And the end result is that General Braxton Bragg and his Army of Tennessee are driven from Chattanooga and into Georgia. And I believe his army retreats to near Dalton after this happens. And the story I have here is from the area of where Lookout Mountain is. So the Battle of Lookout Mountain was fought on November 24th, 1863, and resulted in the Confederates being driven off Lookout Mountain. Despite what General Grant says about it being pure romance, it was a Union victory that was won by General Joseph Hooker, which is likely why General Grant is calling it pure romance. But that's for another episode. So Fort Oglethorpe is a town located near Lookout Mountain. And there are stories that on the anniversary of the battle, in November, you can hear the sound of horses, the clanking of metal, and just the sounds of an army on the move, much like what you talked about, Jen, with the Battle of Chancellorsville. And I think this is again another common occurrence on many battlefields is that on the anniversary, the activity becomes like heightened almost that it's there all the time, but then on the anniversary it becomes heightened again just because I think of the energy that's left behind after this happens. So one night A woman named Georgiana C. Kotarski and a friend of hers decide to do some ad hoc paranormal investigation. And I'm picturing this like for our supernatural fans that listen to this, I'm picturing them as being like the ghost facers, like just this kind of dollar store ghost hunters that are out there trying to, do their thing or whatever. They're not being like, Sam and Dean or like as we know, Phil and Jessica. So they are in her yard, this Georgiana's yard, and all of a sudden, from a grove of oak trees, a white orb emerges. And it's very bright and it moved in a way that was intelligent. And in that, it, it's intelligent in that it is avoiding the limbs of the trees, but then it eventually lands on one and descends to the ground. And then, as it's descending to the ground, the orb breaks into other lights. And as the orbs reach the ground, they transform into three human sized shapes and figures. And so the guy that's with her decides he's going to approach the figures, as one does. And he's realizing as he's walking towards them that they're young Union soldiers. And two of them are carrying another soldier who has this huge wound in his stomach. And the soldiers are staring at him. He's staring back. And he's convinced that these guys can see him. And so the man tells them that they're dead and they need to go back into the light. And the forms went back to being orbs and went back into the trees.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm like, so these people decide to do this ghost investigation on the eve of on the night of that battle anniversary, and this is what happens to them. Um, I was creeped out by that story.
For
Um,
sure.
yeah, and there's also a road that is like it's a gap through the mountain, and it's very near where the Battle of Lookout Mountain takes place. And this road was also used during the Battle of Chickamauga during the retreat back to Chattanooga. Now, keep in mind, this retreat that happens on September 20th, 1863, is, I don't want to say it's disorganized, but it's a retreat. Like they're running back to Chattanooga. And during this, there's a small group of Union soldiers that gets separated from the rest. And they're lost and they started to walk along the east side of Lookout Mountain. And they run into enemy troops and they run into locals that aren't particularly friendly towards them. And the men are seen by a few locals, like they seem to keep circling back to the same area, so they're definitely lost. And then they finally are headed in a southern direction towards what is very nasty terrain with steep drop-offs, sinkholes, and caverns. There were well-worn paths in the area, but the soldiers never found them. And these guys disappeared and were never seen again. And shortly after the war ended, people in the area began to talk about hearing strange noises on one particular rainy night. And they claimed to have heard voices through the rain and the sound of marching men. And some witnesses also heard crying and even wailing as if someone was in horrible pain. So some of the locals investigated the next day and they found where the sounds were coming from. There was also boot prints in the drying mud as if someone had marched by. But the prints were weird. They simply started like out of thin air and then ended 100 yards away and they
Oh,
just stop.
No.
So whether it's the soldiers that got lost, I didn't know that about the Battle of Chattanooga that there was a group of them that got lost and were never heard from again after the retreat. That I'm going to do a little bit digging around to see if I can find out more about who those guys were, where they were, what unit they were from, and all that. But that story creeped me out. And the area of Lookout Mountain, it's a creepy place. It's a beautiful place, but it's creepy. Like when
It's
we
always
stayed,
it's always foggy.
yeah, it's always foggy. It's rains there.
Well,
It
not
seems,
always, but you know what I mean.
yeah.
It's usually foggy.
But we stayed there and we stayed on kind of the slope of Lookout Mountain. And the property we stayed on, beautiful property. There's a little cabin we stayed in, it's Airbnb. We would stay there again. But the woman that ran the Airbnb, and she said, like, have to tell you, there's graves on our property, and they're of children that died during the yellow fever epidemic in 1863. And so we found the graves, and there's just these two children that were buried on the property that died in 1863, and that was creepy too. So the area has this very creepy feeling when you're there, especially at night. Um, but these stories, like especially with the men that disappeared, that creeped me out. Like it's also sad too, because nobody knows what happened to them.
yeah.
They just disappeared
Yeah.
and their bodies were never found.
Common. Mhm.
Yeah, you're up, Darren.
Well, it kind of leads into my story a little bit. Thank you so much for the introduction right there, man. I very much appreciate that. My next story comes from the bloodletting of U.S. Grant's Overland Campaign in 1864 at the Battle of Cold Harbor. Now, coming off the Battle of Spotsylvania, which saw 31,000 combined casualties, including 18,399 from the Union side, Grant's push to destroy Lee was becoming a complete bloodbath, with memories of that 2 week long inconclusive battle highlighted by men who were trampled and drowned in the mud and the pouring rain at the bloody angle. Grant's going to swing southeast to try to get around Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. Now, the two armies would meet again, not far from the old Gaines Mill battlefield from the 1862 Seven Days battles, at a crossroads called Cold Harbor, named for an inn owner he was a local named Isaac Burnett because it served cold food. It was neither cold nor a harbor. There you go, right? Cold Harbor had been captured on May 31st, 1864 by Bill Sheridan, and he held out against a small Confederate infantry attack the next day. But overnight, on June 2nd, the battle line had grown to 59,000 Confederates and 109,000 Union troops. Now, Grant, after capturing a handful of rebel prisoners, convinced himself that Lee's army was exhausted and on its last legs, and figured, hey, he'll have no problem punching through this Confederate entrenchments at Cold Harbor. Obviously, Grant's decision was as disastrous as Mary's was Oregon at 4th IPA last Friday, right? Because to break the rebel line, he had to break and attack an entrenched enemy, with many of the Federal troops being green from heavy artillery units, the men called paper collar units, due to their lack of experience. Now, before their assault, many of the Union men wrote their names on pieces of paper and put them on their bodies, so their identities would be known after they were killed. So when dawn came on June 3rd of 64, the Union men attacked the breastworks, and reportedly over 7,000 men total fell in just 20 minutes. Now, total casualties for the Union was about 13,000, and the Confederates around 4,600, depending on who you read. And the battle stretched out all the way until June 12th, when Grant finally had enough, and he moved his army southwest across the James to threaten Petersburg. But Grant would famously say of all the attacks he ordered in the war, the one at Cold Harbor was the one he regretted the most. With so much instant death and so much pain and emotion experienced, it's no surprise that the battlefield at Cold Harbor is one of the more haunted battlefields throughout the entire Civil War. But many of the men had made those efforts to put their names on their bodies, like we said, to prevent burials in unknown, which was their greatest fear. Burial parties after the battle were not as diligent as they hoped. Photographs taken after the battle by a photographer named John Reiki and later published in Alexander Gardner, they famously show a carriage carrying still clothed skeletons all packed together, 4 skulls. One had a foot sticking out that was still in the pants leg. I've never seen those pictures. But suffice it to say, they didn't seem to be looking for names and papers on them, and they were throwing them into these entrenchments. In 1869, visitors to the battlefield saw partially exposed skeletons emerging from the earth, as if the dead men hoped to be buried with their names. They didn't get their last wish. For that reason, it's possible that many of the dead of Cold Harbor are still there, trying to make sense of what happened to them. Now, like many battlefields, visitors to Cold Harbor come and they walk the grounds. Reenactors, they wear the Civil War uniforms on their visits, as a way to honor their side of the battle. We see every battlefield does that. Many have reported spots of extreme cold on the battlefield, despite it being in the dead of summer. Hazy forms of soldiers in the distance running for cover behind long gone entrenchments have been seen, as well as distant cries and groans begging for help from over a century and a half ago. In a book named L.B. Taylor, he wrote a book called Civil War Ghosts of Virginia. Taylor describes one event where a reenactor visited the battlefield. He felt a pair of clammy, unseen hands. Actually, it was a woman running up her leg. She sat up immediately and looked to find a bearded face of a phantom Union soldier staring at her, who disappeared seconds later. Her and her husband later were awakened, and apparently they didn't leave, they stayed. They were awakened in their tent by the sounds of distant drums, musketry, and the sound of a large human body being dragged through the woods nearby as if it was being buried. What is a very common appearance at Cold Harbor are odd mists that suddenly appear and disappear in the battlefield. A local couple, William and Crystal Sykes, they reported the strange colored mist as well as their overall experience to a newspaper called the Mechanicsville Local in 2011. They had just left their car and they walked down a path when they heard what sounded to them like a cannon discharging. Since there was no reenactment taking place that day, they were confused. William wanted to have his picture taken near a trench, pretending to be a sharpshooter. And as he aimed his rifle, he felt a presence standing behind him. As soon as his wife took the picture, the camera was smacked out of her hands onto the ground and broke as it hit a rock on the ground.
Oh.
It was this moment when they saw this strange fog that was accompanied by an overwhelming feeling of sadness. As the mist began to drift towards the couple, they decided, time to go. And they left the battlefields immediately, as if that wasn't enough already. But stories like these are plentiful in most of these battlefields. But a place like Cold Harbor, the site of quick and intense death, again, like Antietam, it's not a surprise that this battlefield isn't too quick to give up her dead, no matter how much the men want to leave and move on themselves.
That's creepy. That's really creepy.
And that's those battlefields like that, absolutely.
Yeah, that's
and we visited Cold Harbor. And I mean, unfortunately, unlike nearby Gaines Mill, a lot of it's not really there anymore.
Yeah.
But you can still see the breastworks, and like we say all the time, they're real and they're spectacular, right? And you can watch the steps of those Union men. But when you study the Battle of Cold Harbor, you're talking about ground zero of Civil War combat, and you can feel it while you're there.
Yeah, have you been there before, Jen?
Yeah, I went for the first time in July when we were
that's
out
right.
that way.
Yeah. It's creepy there.
And when you see
it was one that we hadn't seen, but we wanted to go, so we did.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful battlefield. There's a lot of cool areas like that. The Overland Campaign, Spotsylvania is great. So many of these are good battlefields. You can go. The 7 days are really, really nice. You can go visit those. A lot of those battlefields you can still sort of see. Gaines Mill is pristine. If you've been, it's maybe a couple hundred yards away from Chancellorsville. It's really, really close. So it's a great place to go see as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I do like that you mentioned Chamberlain's quote, and I know we've mentioned it a few times on this podcast, including on the Spooktacular before, but just his in great deeds something abides, on great fields something stays, forms change and pass, bodies disappear, but spirits linger, to consecrate ground for the vision place of souls.
Yeah. It's a Civil War plays they're very they're emotional, they're powerful, and like we said at the beginning of this, we do this to have fun. We tell these campfire stories, tell these ghost stories. Take them for as serious or as not serious as you want. It's the Halloween season, so we're gonna have a lot of fun telling these stories, and so we like to do this. And this is a tradition. Next year will be the 7th.
Yep,
it'll be year number 7. I'm already getting itchy. 7 years. There you go. Right.
Well, I think too, ghost stories have been around. We talked about it in one of the early ones, like for centuries, for hundreds and hundreds of years. Odds are that the guys sitting around the campfires talked about them too. These Civil War soldiers probably talked about stories from their hometown of strange happenings and stuff. And we even talked about, and I think it was our first episode, where Chamberlain apparently saw George Washington.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. Yeah.
Yeah. And people could have their own opinions of the ghost tours and these in Gettysburg and other places, but it's entertainment. It's fun. It's fun.
Yeah.
So what's coming up for us next, Mary? What's new for us?
So we are going to be recording an episode about St. Albans next. St. Albans Raid, taking it back to give it a bit of a Canadian connection, and then we have to sit down at the old Breakfast Club headquarters and come up with some more episodes.
Sweet.
But yeah, so before we depart, I don't know why that's a creepy word, but any final words from you, Jay Price? You've joined us now. This has been your 6th time.
No, I always look forward to this. It's fun. And since Darren mentioned Chicago, I'll throw out there that in about 3 weeks, I'm doing another marathon this year down in Indianapolis.
Awesome.
So, yeah, so
crazy.
more running.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you be
So
take care of yourself. Otherwise, you'd be telling your ghost story for the seventh annual. You'll be a floating head in a jar next year when we do this.
Oh my God.
yeah. Yeah.
Just like you're the ghost
Well,
with no legs.
That's true.
yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, that would add to the spooky, right?
Oh gosh.
That would definitely just give him a spook down here at the old Zoom headquarters.
Yeah.
Floating head in a
Yeah.
jar. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. My other thought is that I really need to start reading some of Mark Nesbitt's books.
Mhm.
So yeah.
They
Yeah,
they're
they're entertaining. They're fun.
they're really good. And he's visited all these battlefields. His
Hmm.
wife goes with him. He's got friends who are
Yeah.
there, and they do the dowsing rods as well.
I've heard of those.
Yeah, and they
Mhm.
sometimes do them on Expedition X as well. I've seen them do them on there
Yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but and he talks obviously about the history too. Like his books are also a great way to learn, like get a little bit of a general overview of the battle. But he talks like he's got like examples of EVP and just like local stories as well. So
Hmm.
he's going and collecting those local stories. So they are really like I highly encourage anybody to check them out. There, even if you're not into the ghosts, check them out because he's a great writer. And
Mhm.
he
Yeah.
obviously knows his history being a park ranger or former park ranger.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I think we say this every year, but part of the fun of doing this is you investigate the history behind some of these places that you wouldn't have found otherwise if you weren't looking for specifically ghost stories.
Exactly. I
Well,
completely agree with
most
that.
of the ghost stories are based in some historical fact. But again, if it makes someone go to the Pry House to go visit them, that's cool. If it makes somebody go to Cold Harbor or any of this stuff, it's worth it. I mean, because
Mhm.
for whatever history you go, as long as you go to some kind of history, that's the big deal.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
Any final words from you, Darren?
Actually, yes. As we jump off into this dark night, let us remember the wise words of Edgar Allan Poe when he said, and I quote, "Once upon a midnight dreary, while Mary pondered, weak and weary, over many a pint and curious volume of her forgotten beer, while she nodded, nearly napping, suddenly came a tapping. 'Tis some visitor," she muttered, "tapping at my chamber door. Pay your beer tab," quoth the bartender, "and come back here nevermore."
Oh, Jesus.
Happy Halloween.
Oh my gosh.
Everybody have a happy Halloween. We'll talk to you all literally on the other side.
Thank you again to Jen Price for joining us for this as always. And to our listeners, thank you for everything. And we will see you all next time.
Boo.